Witches have long been misunderstood, feared, and even persecuted throughout history. These mysterious, magic-wielding pagans were seen to be the antithesis of God-fearing Christians and a threat to the organizing structures of mainstream religion and society. But the witches of more recent memory have taken on a different cultural significance and cachet. These largely female characters are seen as charismatic, empowered outsiders whose dark magic is exciting.
I made you forget with a spell.
And pretty harmless.
I am a witch. A real, house-haunting, broom-riding, cauldron-stirring witch.
I'm stirring up a little revenge for Mr. Rothwell. I'm giving him expanding butt until I can find the perfect revenge spell.
Witchiness has been popping up in pop culture for decades. But with the advent of social media, more people aren't just celebrating fictional witches, they're learning how to practice witchcraft themselves.
How to become a beginner witch.
I create weekly videos on topics like witchcraft and paganism, and I also go live on YouTube every Friday for Pagan Happy Hour.
Wicca and other forms of witchcraft are gaining more visibility, and with it, a wider acceptance. This content is so popular that it spawned its own online arena.
Witch Talk is the community of witches on TikTok.
Forms of witchcraft are now even recognized as religions, even by the US government. But as pop culture has mainstreamed witchiness for the masses, it's also facing a potential risk. Will it be overtaken by a secular pop cultural pull? On today's episode, we'll talk to religion scholar and Wiccan high priestess Thorn Mooney about these long misunderstood religions and why witches' views of magic aren't what you'd see in a Harry Potter potions class.
Magic is much more about a willingness to explore and take control and kind of be confident working outside of that status quo.
And with one of the original witch talkers, Hannah Hawthorne, about why forms of witchcraft are gaining a foothold today with millennials and Gen Z.
The transparency and the way that witchcraft is available is a very good thing.
I'm Dave DeSteno, and this is How God Works.
When I tell people that I'm a Wiccan, I think now in this day and age, people don't jump to spells as quickly as maybe as they would have 20 or 30 years ago. People have a sense that that's some kind of religion. Mostly what I deal with, working at universities and in education, mostly people are surprised that I'm smart. Because I think there's this reputation that if you're a Wiccan or you're interested in magic or psychic powers or the New Age or whatever, it must be because you're gullible or there's something like intellectually wrong with you.
Thorn Mooney is a scholar of evangelical Christianity and other American faiths at the University of North Carolina. But she's also a Wiccan high priestess and an acclaimed author of books about Wicca. But like many millennials who became interested in witchcraft, her initial way in was pop culture.
Hail to the guardians of the watchtowers of the north by the powers of Mother and Earth. Hear us.
In some way, I'm very much a stereotype of the time. I saw The Craft as a young girl in 1996 and was really enchanted by the prospect of magic. That wasn't a thing that had occurred to me was out there in the world that I could do. And there was a lot of witch media in the 90s, and I was an avid consumer of all of it.
Not dead, nor not of the living.
I found Buffy the Vampire Slayer subsequently. And then Practical Magic with Nicole Kidman and Sandra Bullock came out in 98, right? Then there was Charmed. I think that was also 97. I had some girlfriends who were equally interested, and we would go to the Walden Books at the mall and read a lot of books. We didn't yet have the internet, so we were swapping books and kind of dependent on things we would hear from each other.
While Thorn was excited by the magic and spellcasting at first, she quickly became just as interested in the history and practice behind the magic, witchcraft. Or perhaps a better word might be witchcrafts, since there's more than one type.
The easiest way to think about it is that witchcraft is a relationship with the spirit world, and through the practice of particular kinds of magic and folk traditions, we have a say in the world around us.
And then how about Wicca in particular? What defines its nature?
I like to tell people, in the same way that football is a type of sport, but not all sports are football, Wicca is a type of witchcraft, but there are a lot of different kinds of witchcraft. Wicca could easily be traced exclusively to the works of this British civil servant named Gerald Gardner, who was writing about his supposed encounter with a secretive witch cult in the 1950s. Gardner was a bit of a media hound, and he produced a couple of books, and he defines particular ritual practices, particular sorts of beliefs, and those make up today what we call Wicca.
Is there an overriding theology that guides it? Or is there a lot more individual and local control?
I think one of the big draws of Wicca for a lot of folks is that idea of individual authority and personalization. That's not to say that Wicca is necessarily a free-for-all, but there's so much room to bring yourself into it. And I think that's one of the reasons why Wicca tends to attract a lot of creative kind of outsider types sometimes, is that sense of freedom. The people who are most drawn to Wicca, whether or not they actually are, they feel like outsiders. They think of themselves as being outside of their families, perhaps, maybe because they are queer, or they are just different from the folks around them. And I think that especially folks who might be raised in more restrictive traditions, or they might be part of monotheistic religions, etc., they feel like maybe the traditional structures around them don't provide what they need. The idea that they could have a say in some of the central rites of their own religious group is really exciting and novel, maybe even a little scary. In many ways, the point of a lot of what we're doing is kind of getting in touch with ourselves, figuring out what we want out of our lives, building relationships in the environments around us, both with our communities and with the land around us. Some Wiccans today do identify as environmentalists, and environmental concerns certainly are at the fore of a number of both Wiccan and witchcraft traditions. But for others, the emphasis is on ritual practice, a relationship with specific deities.
And that leads to another defining aspect of Wicca, its connection to the feminine.
To me, feminism is really tightly ingrained into Wicca one way or the other. Now, people take that in different directions. Some people openly identify as feminists, but we shouldn't take that to mean that all Wiccans are equally fighting the patriarchy and upholding the rights of the women in their own lives. But Wicca lends itself to both feminism and an emphasis on what we might think of as feminine power, the feminine mysteries, etc. I think just by virtue of the fact that there's an emphasis on a goddess in addition to a god.
Even with the emphasis on autonomy and individual practice, many Wiccans also are part of a larger community, something called a coven.
In my particular tradition, the coven is that organizing unit. It's made up of people who are initiates in the tradition, who see their central mission as practicing together, performing the liturgy, and carrying that tradition forward, whatever that means to them. So the coven is an intimate group. It's not something that folks can just walk in and out of. There's a process for joining a coven that we often call seeking, or sometimes petitioning, and there's an initiatory process, kind of like magical adoption, where you bring somebody in. I'm part of a more hierarchical initiatory tradition, so when folks are first brought in, we have a degree system. And somebody who is a high priestess like myself, it's a reflection of specific training that I've received that I sought out and worked through and then pass on to other people.
But that hierarchy is limited. It's local. There's no pope, rabbinical assembly, or Dalai Lama type figure in Wicca that dictates what all the coven should do.
Other traditions of Wicca have more egalitarian modes or more of kind of revolving door policies. So what I'm doing in my group, for example, doesn't necessarily have any bearing on another coven in another part of the country, even if we have some linkage through our initiatory line or people in common. Maybe they hold open rituals or are more community-based, serving a wider network of people. Some covens are just made up of groups of friends who want to explore together. And in any case, even in my own tradition, which does emphasize the coven, there's still an emphasis on solitary practice. So there are plenty of solitary Wiccans, and they're just as valid as folks in coven.
As I often say, religion isn't just about belief. It's also about experience. And often that experience comes from rituals and practices, things that affect how we feel, not just what we think. It's the same for Wiccans.
Most Wiccans will tell you that the big deal, the thing that we're all trying to develop and work on and get better at, is routine practice, more effective practice, more meaningful practice, and not necessarily trying to align, especially with each other, what we believe in.
For Wiccans, is the notion of having a spiritual experience, of feeling that awe, of feeling kind of some transcendence, is there a practice for it?
I think it's built into our rituals, and most Wiccans will tell you, and I tell my initiates this as a coven leader, that experience happens over the course of time. One of the central capital M mysteries of Wicca, one of the things that you're learning is just how the nature of time is cyclical, and winter is going to come and winter is going to go, and it's going to give way to spring. And this is going to happen throughout the entirety of our lives, regardless of whatever else is going on. So a lot of the spiritual magic of Wicca, I think, is revealed in time. It's about finding meaning in the day in and day out, rather than necessarily looking for what I think of as fireworks. There are some folks out there who claim to be able to hear the gods speaking to them directly in their brains, and there are people who claim to have various kinds of psychic abilities. I'll tell you that it's not a typical experience. For the average sort of Wiccan, the magic comes in that day in and day out and the active participation in meaning making. And that looks really different for everybody.
This is one aspect that is appealing to more and more people as they leave the larger institutional faiths. A kind of you do you attitude. As Thorne says, this doesn't mean a total free-for-all when it comes to Wicca, but rather a focus on agency.
I think in any religious group you might look at, you'll see people seeking out that individual experience. And we tend to use the word spirituality sort of synonymously with individual experience. And I think because that's rooted so deeply in Wicca already, and in other types of witchcraft and other magical traditions, I think that's the reason why we're one of the faster growing movements, especially in the United States today.
And with this growth, Thorne and others are working hard to educate and demystify Wicca and witchcraft, to remove bias and wariness, and introduce a deeper and more nuanced understanding of these traditions.
One of the consequences of becoming a religion scholar is realizing that the category of magic is as equally dicey as the category of religion. And I think you'll see, regardless of what sorts of groups you're looking at, magic is a banner for a lot of the stuff that we just are uncomfortable thinking of as religious. It tends to be those things practiced by people who are marginalized or people we just think are weird. Magic is the stuff that kind of isn't sanctioned by the powers that be, whatever that looks like, which means that whether or not something is categorized as magic or religion really shifts.
I was going to say, is that why it's attractive to more marginalized people? Because part of being marginalized by definition is being outside of the power structure or the higher levels of the power structure of a society.
Yeah, totally. I think so. And you can look at various points in church history, right, where there are particular rites performed by particular types of Christians that other sorts of Christians are calling magic that we wouldn't necessarily think of today. I mean, folks today don't go to mass and think of transubstantiation as an act of magic, right? You wouldn't call it that in a Catholic church. And yet a witch performing a particular ritual with, let's say, a burning candle or something, claiming that something happens. Like that strikes us as being somehow really different. Magic is the stuff that happens outside of the bounds of the village.
This kind of attitude can be leveled against a lot of believers, of any faith. Anything we don't understand can lead to fear, skepticism, or even outright ridicule. But the numbers show that our culture is shifting towards acceptance. Something about Wicca is resonating with people, especially younger people. It could be the spells or the magic, but it also could be something deeper. Behind the magic and spell casting is the idea of empowerment, that anyone, through a ritual or spell, can impact their world.
I've never met anybody who isn't approaching Wicca because they want to change something in their lives or about their relationship with the world or something. I think people are hungry for some kind of transformation. And I think that's definitely a big part of what draws folks, even if they genuinely desire a relationship with the divine, or maybe they're having what they perceive as mystical experiences. People are psyched about the idea of magic and being able to do spells. And I think that that's cool. And hopefully they come in and see that there's a lot more. I think sometimes just the feeling of agency is just as powerful. So feeling like I have the space to take action in a situation. Maybe I'm facing an injustice or I'm really miserable in some aspect of my life and I want to make changes. Just taking the steps forward. It's kind of why if you buy a self-help book, just the experience of buying the self-help book makes you feel better even before you've started to read it. That's kind of glib, but that's what I think sometimes. The process of planning the ritual, inviting people to the ritual, doing it together, building that relationship ends up being just as important to me as the outcome of the ritual.
As for Thorne, though it was the excitement of the magic of the craft that first attracted her to Wicca, she says it's become something different now.
So when I was young and watching things like The Craft, right, magic was very much, oh, well, this is about supernatural powers, okay? And again, I'm not here to say that those things don't exist for the people who believe in them, but it's not how I think about magic anymore. To me, magic is much more about a willingness to explore and take control and kind of be confident working outside of that status quo. It's not necessarily specific actions or practices. And I think whatever you're doing, whether it's a magical practice or a religious practice or whatever it is that you're into, I feel like one of the measures of whether or not it quote unquote works is if it's causing positive change in your life, are you better for it? Wicca makes me better. And even though my relationship with my gods has shifted, my relationship with my Wiccan communities has shifted, it makes my life much richer. And that's what keeps me at it after all these years.
For many people, part of maturing into a faith doesn't only mean developing a greater understanding of it yourself, but also sharing that wisdom with newcomers. And in the world of Wicca, many of those newcomers look to the expertise and content Thorne shares in her books and online.
As to advice I would give folks, I would say to read a lot and to read with discernment. There's a lot of stuff floating around both online and in published books. And because Wicca and other types of witchcraft and magic tend to be so decentralized, no one person represents the entire movement. So if you read a book or you see a TikTok or a YouTube video and it seems kind of off or nuts or it's not for you, that doesn't characterize the entire tradition.
When we come back, we'll take a look at the online world of witchcraft and what it means for a new generation of younger witches.
Hey guys, if you're seeing this video, you probably see a lot of witches on your For You page. And this is for people who are curious, but they don't know where to start. So I thought I'd show you something simple that I started at the beginning of my practice.
That's Hannah Hawthorne, a pagan witch and one of the early major content creators on TikTok.
During 2020, it was quarantine, as I'm sure we all remember, and I needed human interaction.
So you're gonna need a bay leaf and you're also gonna need a pen. And all you're gonna do is you're gonna write your intention on a bay leaf. So this could be something you wanna manifest, bring into your life, or something you wanna banish or move out of your life.
I wanted to talk to people about this very specific thing that I couldn't really talk to anyone else about. I didn't have anyone in my life at that time that was a practitioner. And with this one video, I amassed some sort of following, and I didn't even know that people were sharing their practices too much on TikTok.
Soon, this type of content proliferated and even gained its own prominent hashtag.
Witch Talk is the hashtag that blew up in 2020 and really created a space for witches to find each other on TikTok specifically.
Did you know you can find out if you were born a witch just by looking at your hands?
So this is my reunification spell. So first I'm going to cleanse my space. You can use anything.
Traditional, a green witch, a hereditary witch, there's a lot to choose from.
A ward is a type of protection spell, but it's used for preventative purposes.
How to make and use black salt.
Today in Palmistry 101, we're going to learn about attachment lines.
I did not expect my cinnamon stick throwing video to be so popular, but thank you for all the love I received.
And there's been a lot of practitioners who have put really valuable information on YouTube or even other platforms like Instagram, but I think that you have to sort through a little bit more of the flashy stuff, if you will. I've never had a teacher of any sort. I am self-taught through books and YouTube, which kind of sounds funny, but it's the same thing that I do now. And there's a lot of value to be had. I think that's one of the most beautiful things about the internet. You can find a lot of really great content if you know where to look.
Hannah found a community of Wiccans, neo-pagans, and all sorts of people practicing, learning, and sharing info about various forms of witchcraft. A community she began to play a major role in herself.
Since sharing my practice online, my practice has grown exponentially because I have had that opportunity to meet other witches, and we are able to help each other grow and learn.
This is a great beginner form of glamour magic. Anyone can do this. If you're a witch and you have a wax burner, or honestly, even if you're not, I have a really great tip for you. The themes of our ritual are gratitude and release. This month I've been focusing on self-love magic, and so today I'm making a simmer pot. Let me show you how I make moon water, and it's probably not in the way that you think.
Hannah is the first to admit that while it offers benefits, the internet can be a pretty toxic, overwhelming place too. But the online witchcraft community was instrumental early on as a place where she found acceptance, purpose, and a sense of belonging. One far different and deeper than her upbringing in evangelical Christianity.
I was heavily involved in my church. I was a Christian summer camp counselor. I nearly went to seminary to become a pastor, essentially in my quest to figure out what divinity meant to me. And through all of this digging, I essentially just kept reading, started with the Bible, and I went back and back and back. I kind of unweaved the beliefs that had been taught to me.
For her, paganism is a form of religion. But it took a while for her to get to that place.
I have always felt myself to be a religious person, to be someone who had some sort of beliefs. But the beliefs that I was born into didn't really fit me. I always felt like I was doing something wrong. I had a lot of purity and sin culture. I used to be so fearful of the consequences of my actions, whether or not I was going to go to hell or manifest some sort of demon, something like that.
Hannah, like many young people, had lost connection with traditional faiths, but didn't want to lose spirituality entirely. Witchcraft, which she now practices, provided a perfect answer, and the online community a supportive congregation of sorts.
While I was in the church, I never really felt confident in my beliefs. I only thought the things that I thought because I didn't think I had a choice. Now being educated about Christianity, about paganism, I am so confident in myself and my spiritual beliefs. The Hannah that was in the church is a very different Hannah than who you were talking to today. It brought so much meaning to everything that I do. I take my life and I make it magical.
This idea of practice is central to Hannah, to the content she now creates online, and to how she lives her life day to day.
Naturally, we all want to feel magical, to romanticize our lives. There's nothing wrong with this, but I know how it can leave you feeling like your life is not magical enough. So I'm here to remind you that your practice is just as valid even if it doesn't look witchy. If all you do today is wipe down your calendar with the intention of cleansing, that too is witchcraft. I take the regular things that I am doing throughout the day that I have to do, be it laundry or dishes or cooking, and I make them part of my spirituality through intention. Because that's really what my practice comes down to. I have gravitated more into sharing that, sharing simply what it looks like to be a practitioner going about her day. Today we are making magically whipped feta. This is a very simple, very personalizable recipe.
I practice a lot of kitchen witchcraft, which essentially is to weave your intention, your magic into the food that you consume. Essentially, everything has magical properties, magical correspondences. These are your symbolic magical links. When you think of something, it holds an association for you. And through that, I make the mundane magical.
At heart, that's what most religions around the world are about. Finding spirituality in the things you do. Acting with intention to find the proverbial, or here maybe not so proverbial, magic in life. But witchcraft adds something to the equation. Something that can be pretty attractive to those who feel outside of or even marginalized by more traditional faith communities. Autonomy. Witches don't require an intermediary. No priest, rabbi, or minister is needed to practice. And that means no one tells them how to worship. But that autonomy also promises something else. An ability to make change in this world. A sense of power. A sense of doing something, not just asking for something. And for spiritual seekers looking to chart their own way in life, becoming a witch or Wiccan can make sense. Who knows whether the explosive growth of online Wiccan content will continue? But one thing's for sure right now. It's speaking to people. It's bringing to light a tradition that was often hidden in the shadows. And with that, providing an alternative choice for those looking to find a new spiritual path. Next time on How God Works.
I was talking to an animal rescuer, and he said the worst thing that ever happened to snakes was the story of the Garden of Eden.
Humans' relationship with other animals is often troubled, to say the least. Could the myths we grow up with be playing a role?
In native traditions, animals are much more like us than they are unlike us. They think, they talk, they have families that they care about, they even have spirituality.
Is it wild fantasy to think that animals might not just be part of our spiritual mythos, but even have their own?
Well, almost everything that we thought was exclusively human, when you put your mind to it and try and find a way of measuring it in another species, you can come across.
Join us next time to find out. How God Works is hosted and written by me, Dave DeSteno. Our senior producer is Josie Holtzman. Our producer is Sophie Eisenberg. Our intern is Annika DeVries. Executive producer is Genevieve Sponsler. Merritt Jacob is our mix engineer and composed our theme, which was arranged by Chloe DeSteno. The executive producer of PRX Productions is Jocelyn Gonzalez. This podcast was also made possible with support from the John Templeton Foundation. If you want to learn more, you can find our website at howgodworks, all one word, .org, or follow me on X or Blue Sky at David DeSteno.